Ladies and gentlemen, Binnall of America!
And now, ladies and gentlemen, your host, Tim Binnall.
No commercials, no subscriptions, no network, no rules, and at the end of the day, my friends, no comparison. Welcome back to another edition of BOA The Revival. Before we get into tonight's show, I just want to do a quick plug. Next week is the 23rd of April, and as luck would have it, it miraculously lands on the 20th anniversary of when we started this very program. It'll be our 20th anniversary next week, and we have a blockbuster program for you all next week. The Binnall of America 20th anniversary spectacular. It's going to be many hours long. All of your old friends who've been on the show over the years are going to be coming on the program. All the regulars are going to be on to celebrate the 20th anniversary. So be sure to check that out next week on Binnall of America. And in a way, tonight's episode was kind of inspired by the 20th anniversary edition that's coming out next week, because, I was looking back on the program and I'm like, one of my, I like to think I'm pretty self-aware. It's like one of my foibles in a sense of doing this show for so long, drawbacks, I guess you could say, of doing the show for 20 years, is sometimes we'll cover a topic and many years will go by and I'll be like, oh, we already did that. And, then I turn around and look and it's like, with tonight's guest, that was 14 years ago. 14 years ago. There are people who are, I'm sure, listening right now who were not listening to Binnall of America back in 2011. So I'm shortchanging them by not covering some of these topics, not running it back and doing these topics again, especially tonight's program, the stuff we're going to explore on BOA tonight. Our guest is Larry Arnold. He is the world's foremost expert on spontaneous human combustion, which is one of my favorite topics. It is so chilling and creepy and unsettling. And also, you talk about like the stuff we get into on the show here, folks, your Bigfoots and your Bigfoot and your UFOs and stuff like that. And it's those things are fleeting. You want to talk about fleeting? Spontaneous human combustion is fleeting. That is, it is very, very fleeting. And it seems like I often hear from people like, oh, whatever happened with spontaneous human combustion? Apparently, it's still happening every now and again these days. So we're going to get into all that. We're going to do a deep dive, or we're going to run it back and do a deep dive on spontaneous human combustion with Larry Arnold. And as I may have said, I'm kind of rambling here a little on the intro, but I want to point this out for folks because this is how awesome an individual Larry is. Now, we had him on the show back in 2011. They're not going to see the video, Larry, but I have it here, right here. Larry actually, folks, sent me a first edition copy of Ablaze after we did the interview and signed the book. I have a signed first edition Ablaze from Larry Arnold. That's how sweet of a guy he is. That's just how awesome he is. So long overdue to get you on the program, Larry. And I can't wait. A spontaneous human combustion, man. Let's dig into it. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Excellent. We are delighted to be back with you, Tim. A wonderful introduction. We appreciate that very much. It was fun doing the first one time around. A couple of new developments have happened since we last discussed the subject. We can go back over some of the classic cases. It's bizarre, as we met many years ago with the Los Angeles Fire Department's arson investigation team. They used the words bizarre, astounding, and awesome. We just did a photo shoot about 6 weeks ago out in Southern California for the History Channel's program with Bill Shatner called The Unexplained. That will debut later this summer or early fall. Fingers crossed. Nothing is guaranteed in television. While you're out in Pasadena, we met with one of the fire chiefs at the station house in Pasadena. And he was able to give us a couple minutes of his time before a fire alarm came in and he had to go out and put out a fire somewhere. But as we were showing him the photos that we're going to be discussing, the cases that we're discussing with you tonight, he was amazed. He said he had never seen, as a fire official who had been to many fatal fire scenes, he had never before seen any fire scene that resembled the cases that we're going to be discussing with you tonight. He kept using the word interesting, very interesting. Very interesting. So hopefully we're going to convey with you and your audience tonight some of the things that we discussed with you way back in 2011, bring you up to date on a couple cases, and we'll have some fun together talking about something that is truly bizarre.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's spontaneous human combustion is kind of like the catch-22 in a way. You're glad it doesn't happen very often, but you kind of wish it would because you'd like to know more. It's like, now I want to point out, because I distinctly remember this from our conversation back in 2011. You speak in the first person plural.
We do.
So folks.
We do.
Yes. Can you explain that a little bit so folks know what's going on there?
Began spontaneously when we were in our sophomore year at college, and when a transformation in consciousness. We started speaking this way in the first person plural automatically. It's something that stuck with us. Philosophically, it's kind of like we're a radio set, but we're not tuned into a specific station or frequency. We're tuned into several frequencies simultaneously. Does cause some humorous problems when we try to make an airline reservation and, say we like a flight from Harrisburg to California. Well, how many seats do you need, sir? Just one. But you said, yeah, we know what we said. We just need a seat. We'll be perfectly fine. No problems. Yeah.
Right.
Get used to that.
Yeah.
Appreciate you bringing that up. It does cause some confusion.
To mention it. Yeah. Because next thing you know, you and I are getting emails from people who were like, what's going on here? And I remember when I first met you, we were talking about it. I was under the impression you like a whole team of researchers here, like working on the spontaneous human combustion. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. No, okay. Now, I want to ask you, because I was looking up Ablaze today, and the review on the Amazon page. Now, this may have been added later, so I may be mixing up the timeline, the dates here, but on the Amazon page, it said you've been studying spontaneous human combustion for 30 years. Now, the book came out in 95, so I don't know if that's accurate or not, that you were studying since the 60s, or if that bio was added later, because I was going to say, if that's the case, then you've been looking at this for like 50 years, which is crazy.
Your math is correct. We're in our mid-70s. We were introduced to this in junior high school. But we got serious about it in the late 60s, early 70s. So we have been spending basically 2/3 of our life traveling the world, digging through archival materials in libraries and documents that have been lost to history until we dug them out and looked at them and found new cases that have been lost to history. Traveling the world, talking to fire professionals, first responders around the world. Not only documenting, but trying to figure out how these astonishingly apparently high heat, but incredibly localized fires can sometimes consume a body to ash.
Yeah.
It's been quite an odyssey.
I can imagine. And I mean, you really are the only guy I know who's carrying on the torch of spontaneous human combustion at all. And it's like, how did you... I guess I almost want to use a fire metaphor, but I'm not that quick. It's Tuesday night. I'm tired. But what lit the spark for spontaneous human combustion? What was it about SponCom that gripped you and it became? I don't want to call it an obsession, but it became a passion for you that you were going to be the spontaneous human combustion guy, if you will.
A fairly easy answer. In fact, we can show you the actual book. When we were in junior high school, we spent 35 cents for a book by Frank Edwards called Stranger Than Science. And in that book, he had a chapter about incredible incinerations, specifically one victim in particular, Mary Hardy Reeser, who incinerated, he said, in 1951 in an apartment building in St. Petersburg, Florida. At that time, we were interested in science generally and kind of had an iconoclastic nature. As we went through high school and then college, studying mechanical engineering, later working in electrical engineering, we never forgot about reading about that chapter about supposedly what happened to Mrs. Reeser, how she was able to incinerate herself to a few pounds of ash and rubble that included the chair in which she was last known to be seated and an end table, and yet there was no other significant flame or heat damage in her apartment. Never forgot about that. As our shift in consciousness brought us into the world of Forteana, we noticed that lots of people were investigating Bigfoot, Sasquatch. Lots of people were looking for UFOs and evidence for or against that. But nobody seemed to be looking into this thing called spontaneous human combustion that we had read about in junior high school. So we decided we'd go down to the Library of Congress, on a weekend and dig into the microfilm archives to see whether or not what we read about in Frank Edwards' book had historical basis, or maybe he had simply made it up as entertaining fiction. In plowing through rolls of microfilm from the St. Petersburg Times and the Tampa Tribune newspapers, we discovered that back in the summer of 1951, Mary Weiser not only died, but she died in such a way that was so mysterious that it was making front page news. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
How could a person burn this completely in an environment that is largely devoid of heat and flame damage that one would associate with a body so badly burned? That certainly mystified the officials who were investigating the case at the time. But we thought maybe she's just something weird happened. It was a one-off case, and that's going to be end of the mystery. Shortly after that, we were given a tip that perhaps a similar case happened in our home state of Pennsylvania to an elderly physician up in Potter County. We started making phone calls, talked to the coroner, talked to the deputy coroner, and eventually made contact with the person who identified the remains of Dr. John Irving Bentley in December of 1966. We went up to Counters Court, talked to every person that we could find who had any involvement in the case, all the first responders, the coroner, the mortician, the deputy coroner. And it all sounded really intriguing. And we kept hearing that photographs had been taken of this fire scene. And we finally made contact. The last door we knocked on that night before coming back home to Harrisburg was with a newspaper editor. Introduced ourselves, explained why we were there and what we were looking for. And the photographer who was the newspaper editor said, yep, I took photographs. I would never publish them. I cannot ever publish them. They're just not something that I would put in the local newspaper. But if I can find them, I'll give them to you and you can do what you want with them. Pretty interesting.
Good deal.
A lot of anticipation. We went home, and a week later, we got an envelope from Potter County, from Counters Port. Expectantly opened it up. And when they pulled the photographs out, we said, wow. We had, in all the research that we had done up to that point, looking at forensic journals, the effects of fire on bodies, how people were explaining ashen burned bodies, severely burned bodies. We had never, until that moment, seen a photograph that was so dramatic, indicating the complete isolation of a fire in a human body. It just belied everything that we had known up until that time, but it had remarkable parallels to the Mary Hardy Weiser case back in 1951. Now we had two cases that fit the historical definition of spontaneous human combustion, or as we prefer to call it now, sudden human cremation. You keep the acronym SHC either way. So that led us on a quest. Could we find any more such cases? So that became both our passion and some would argue our obsession, but it's been a fascinating quest to dig into literature that has been literally sitting on library shelves for decades, if not centuries, collecting dust.
Yeah.
As you go through court after court after court of medical textbooks from France, from Germany, from the UK, we would find occasionally a remarkable case that again fit the classic concept of spontaneous human combustion. And that led to the publication eventually of A Blaze in 1995. Copy date is 1995. It actually came out in 1996. And here we are, talking about something that mainstream science still has not come to terms with, that most fire professionals in the industry, in the profession, would tell us cannot happen, that it's a hoax. These cases are superstitions. They're myths. Bodies cannot burn in the way that history has attributed the phenomenon called spontaneous human combustion. And yet, the evidence is there. The photographs that we have been able to collect from the photographers themselves, that in many cases would have been lost to history had we not doggedly pursued the evidence and managed to obtain these photographs, would never be known to history and to science and to medicine. These photographs are not hoaxes, as Dr. Lester Adelson has told us. He said bodies can't burn like this, so these photographs must be hoaxes. But these photographs were taken by the photographers whom we met. We know the provenance of the photographs. Most of these photographs were taken before the advent of Photoshop, certainly before AI came along.
Yeah.
These are real, genuine historical documents that just belie common sense, refute all the objections that mainstream fire science has levied against us, and there have been many. This phenomenon is genuine. How it is to be explained is a whole other matter. But as we'll hopefully share with your audience tonight in some detail, some of the remarkable cases that leave behind a total quandary, absolute confusion as to how these cases could have happened, how these people could have met their flaming fates.
Right, right. Now, do they, by the nature of how these people burn, do they know, have they been able to figure out, because my first inclination would be like, this must emanate from the gut. I don't know, because all the gases and everything, I guess, right? But I'm no doctor, right? So I don't, maybe it's the heart. I don't know. But do you have a theory? Have they ever sort of where, because it's the fire, it seems to be, it's erupting from within the person. That this is they're literally spontaneously combusting. Something is happening to cause this fire to erupt.
The definition we give for this phenomena is that SHC is the blistering, the smoking, or the burning of human flesh in the absence of a known identifiable external ignition or burn agent. So if you can rule out a drop pipe or a cigarette, contact with an open flame, caustic chemicals, high amperage electricity, radiation, then if those conditions can be removed from the investigative scene, then in our view, one has to consider the possibility, and in some cases, the probability or reality of spontaneous human combustion, SHC. As to how it occurs, we've noted that in the classic cases, that is when the body is really severely badly burned to the bone, and the skeleton can in some cases be reduced to powder. That's how complete these fires are. And we use the term fire in air quotes. We're not sure that this is an oxidizing combustion. But the point of origin of the, let's say, energy that causes this result in a human being does appear in most cases to originate in the abdominal region, the lower torso, upper abdominal region, which lends to suggesting how some of these cases might unfold.
Now, you said, and forgive me, I already lost the scientific words you just said, but you said something along the lines of you don't necessarily think it's, I guess, a fire per se. Is that what you're saying? So what's the alternative there?
The alternative is to an oxidizing type of fire, which is what you get when you strike a match. Okay. Is that we're looking at biochemistry, we're certainly considering bioelectricity, we're looking at alternative energies that are not recognized by most of mainstream Western medicine, but are acknowledged by Eastern physicians, things like Tumo, Kundalini, Ki, Prana, quasi-electrical-like energies that we believe, and Eastern medicine certainly does believe, reside in every living human being. We also looked at patterns of where these fires occur, both to property and to people. And in plotting the number of cases that we have from the United Kingdom, which has more cases like this per capita than any other area in the world, based on our research at least, we found that many of the cases, more than 80% of the cases of anomalous fire phenomena can be connected by straight alignments, suggesting that there's a telluric or geophysical energy that can explain some of the cases.
Interesting. Okay. All right. Yeah. Because it's now at the risk of being really taking it too far. I meant to send this to you before the interview. I did a story about this professor in Zimbabwe who is experiencing these spontaneous fires in his home. And I will send it to you after the interview. I mean, okay. I'm going to tell you exactly what's in the article, so you're not missing out much. But you can reach out to him and talk to him, because he says he's experiencing like these blistering fire feeling. Also, in addition to these fires bursting in his home, he's having these like these fiery sort of, like you were saying, these blistering and all that. And his family don't see any fire on him, but he feels like he's like burning. So, and in the original article from Zimbabwe, they consult with like a scientist and they bring up spontaneous human combustion. So they're like, well, this sounds kind of like spontaneous human combustion, but other stuff's also lighting on fire. And so part of the thing was culturally down in Zimbabwe, they think that maybe it has some kind of supernatural element to it. Have you ever considered the possibility that this is like supernatural? You know what I mean? I mean, that's kind of like a completely enigmatic answer to an already enigmatic phenomenon, right? But at the same time, it's like, could this, rather than some natural or supernatural in a sense, like thing in the way you're talking about, could it be some kind of like, I don't want to go so far as to say like demonic attack or anything like that, but is it possible that this is maybe brought on by some other outside intelligent force, if you will? Maybe we'll never know that, but I mean, have you ever considered that possibility?
We certainly have indeed. In fact, we have a chapter in a book, Blaze, that deals with that whole area, not just of the paranormal aspect of spontaneous human combustion, but then we get into the supernatural aspect of it as well, looking for any kind of, I'll say, the mechanism that explain these fires. One of the problems with the research and the cases that we've collected in our 50 years of documenting this phenomenon is trying to explain how the cases do happen. If all the cases looked alike, it would probably be fairly easy to posit a specific hypothesis or theory to explain them. The challenge for us and for anyone who looks at this phenomenon is that the cases themselves are so varied. They have similarities, but within the similarities, there's a lot of variation, which tells us as a scientist, hopefully with an open mind, curious mindset, that there is no single explanation to explain the entire database of cases. We think there are different aspects that pertain to one case, another set of circumstances that apply to another set of ashen bodies. The case that you mentioned from Zimbabwe is quite intriguing to us. We do not, in a Blaze, delve into the poltergeist fire phenomenon. This is spontaneous combustion of non-human objects, furniture, homes, perhaps entire structures, possibly. We don't recall at the moment a case where property and humans collectively simultaneously have spontaneously burned. So this is really fascinating to us. If this is a situation where both aspects of these strange fires can come together in one location and destroy both property and impact the human living within that structure, that's going to be really intriguing, and we certainly will pursue that to the best of our ability. So we're looking forward to all the information you can provide to us on that case.
Absolutely. I will. I'll send that your way after the interview tonight. Like I said, I should have sent it to you tonight, but I pretty much, you know, everything I know about the case at this point. I've just told you that that's what's going on. And what was interesting to me too, is that he is a professor at a university there in Zimbabwe. So, I mean, and he's a former well-regarded journalist who became a professor. Excellent. So it's like, okay, this is a legitimate, you know, he's apparently a fairly well-known name in Zimbabwe. So it was like, okay, this isn't just like some tale that the newspaper's making up, maybe just to get people. It's like they wouldn't write this about this dude. You know what I mean? So it's a very interesting case. Go ahead.
From your description, it certainly sounds like this gentleman has the academic credentials to be credible. In our research, we've met with fire professionals around the world, and all too often we found just the opposite attitude. These people in the fire service industry often think they know all there is to know about fire behavior, fire processes, even fire phenomena, strange fires, or curious fires that do have conventional, plausible explanations. What we're looking at doesn't seem to have a plausible, conventional explanation. Unfortunately, in trying to find out and to better understand how these fires can be explained that we've been documenting over the decades, we too often find experts who don't want to look at the evidence. This is so intimidating, so frightful to them that they would rather, and to quote one fire marshal in Philadelphia when we sat down with him and showed him photographs of some of the cases, he said, I'd go out, get drunk, and forget about it if he encountered one of these fire scenes, rather than have an open mind and try to figure out how the hell these things happen. when we were down at the National Fire Academy in Emmitsburg, Maryland, wrapping up research for our book before it went to print. We met with 3 senior fire instructors that day, one of whom nonchalantly decided he didn't want to know anything about the subject, walked away. The second instructor overheard that conversation, and we tried to show him the photographs and ask for his assistance in understanding these fires. He literally spun on his heels and ran away from us down the hall. And the third instructor, when we met with him, said, "We don't have a clue." Direct quote, "We don't have a clue." And he invited us into his office to sit down and tell him everything that we knew. It's that kind of open-minded attitude that we so desperately need in this research, because as you understand already, and as your listeners probably can grasp by now, this is a phenomenon that is so bizarre, so intimidating, so frightful, so fear-inducing, that for many people, it's easier for them to just dismiss it outright, to disbelieve it, to ignore the evidence, than to confront it and try to learn something from these amazing, albeit rare, fire fatality deaths.
And what's interesting, too, is, there's a challenge to the topic, and I have mixed feelings, Larry. I like sudden human cremation. I know what you're doing there with that, because it's like the point of this question, in a sense, or this observation, is that, like you got into this in the 70s. We're talking like 3 generations, maybe the third one's a little younger, but 3 generations since, I got into this. And the name spontaneous human combustion is like so loaded with preconceived ideas and baggage, so to speak, that I think people, it's like if they kept calling Bigfoot the abominable snowman or whatever. It's like the name is so fantastical, I think, that people, there's been a disconnect, and as time has gone on, it's become more and more unfathomable to people. The idea, spontaneous human combustion, it's this like magical thing that's like frightening. As you said, it is frightening, but it has a weird sort of like a ridicule factor, and also like a dismissive. And it's like, well, that's from the 70s. That's an old wives' tale from the 70s. And it's been so long since it's really been treated, besides, of course, your research, but since it's been anywhere really discussed. You're not seeing like cable specials about spontaneity anymore, really. It's nostalgia. It's like paranormal nostalgia in a way. And if it's a genuine phenomenon and it's really happening, then that's to the detriment of all of us who want to get to the bottom of it, because people, in instances, I'm sure, like you're saying with these firefighters and stuff, they go to a house, like the thought probably doesn't even cross their mind about spontaneity. And if it does, like there's always the old salty guy who could be like, "Hey, shut up, kid. We don't even deal with that here. Okay, it's he dropped a cigarette on himself or whatever." They kind of try to like, we don't want to be in the tabloids and shit. It's kind of like there's a lot going on there with the whole concept of spontaneous human combustion. I don't really have a question, it was an observation, but I think you get what I'm trying to say, right?
Oh, absolutely. Very astute observation as well, Tim. This used to be fodder for the supermarket tabloids until most of them went out of business. But never knowing when one will find a credible lead. If we saw the Weekly World News, for example, talking about a pastor or a woman or a firefighter who went up in flames, we tried to track it down. Might be credible. With one exception, all those tabloid stories were fiction. One of them was absolutely accurate. And we knew it was accurate because we had already been to that fire scene. It happened to a retired firefighter in upstate New York in 1986 by the name of George Mott. Mm-hmm. And the Weekly World News of that account was absolutely 100% accurate. And we knew it, as we said, because we had already been at that fire scene twice. But your comment about the apprehension and the easily dismissed concept of spontaneous human combustion really does hinge on that phrase itself. Yeah. Firefighters around the world have no trouble with 3 separate words: spontaneous, combustion, and human. That's in every firefighter's vocabulary. But when you put those 3 words together into one concept, you unleash a firestorm of derision and debunking and disdain and dismissal.
Yeah.
So, which is why we've tried to rename to get rid of that stigma. Thank you. By rephrasing the classic cases, the holy burned bodies, as sudden human cremation, because it's not only a precisely accurate description of these astonishingly and amazing fire scenes, but it gets rid of that stigma that's associated with spontaneous.
Yeah.
When it comes to the human body being burned.
Yeah, it's it's a really electrifying turn of phrase. Like, you just say that and people know exactly what you mean. And it evokes a lot of emotion. It's people don't seem to not have really an opinion on spontaneous human combustion. It evokes a response. Now, in going over my notes, forgive me now, because I had read the book in 2011. It's been 14 years. So some of the stuff is I need refresher on. And when I was reminded, going over my notes from back then and your recent stuff, of this 1974 case, Jack Angel, who we believe is a spontaneous human, or sudden human cremation survivor. He experienced it and somehow managed to live through the experience. Just share this story, because this may be, obviously, it's like this could be the guy who lived to tell the tale. This might be the most instructive of anything we've got here on the table, right?
With Jack Angel, we're going to go back and assign to him the description of being a victim and survivor of spontaneous human combustion, because he did not cremate. He lived to tell the incredible tale. Okay. So here we go. There's no way to get around this one with the survivors. This is a subset of the phenomena that irks the hell out of our debunkers, because we have 2 chapters in Ablaze that deal with people who have survived partial spontaneous human combustion, in which their bodies have blistered or smoked, or in Jack Angel's case, experienced severe 3rd, even 4th degree burns. And they have lived to tell about the incredible experience. Jack Angel, first gentleman now of dozens that we had the privilege to interview at length, face to face, who had an astonishingly incredible tale to tell. If it exists online, we haven't found it, but in 1981, we did 3 shows for the program on ABC called That's Incredible. Mm-hmm. The first show dealing with Dr. John Bentley's true sudden human cremation. The second episode dealt with Jack Angel, a survivor of what we believe is spontaneous human combustion. Jack Angel in 1974 was a traveling salesman. He walked out of a motorhome that was his traveling showroom. He was in Savannah, Georgia, made an appointment to meet with a potential client the next day, parked in the parking lot of a Ramada Hotel, spent the night in his motorhome, expecting to meet with the client the next day. Mm-hmm. He missed the appointment, according to his story, as we sat down and interviewed him. When he regained consciousness in his motorhome, he realized that his right forearm had burned black to the bone. His forearm was charred to the bone. He told us that his pajamas were not singed, the sheets on which he lay, and we have photographs of those sheets, were not burned. He did not know how this happened. He suffered no pain at the time. He got himself dressed, exited the motorhome, walked into the Ramada Inn, and lost consciousness. When he regained consciousness, he found himself in the Savannah General Hospital, surrounded by a team of physicians, medical personnel, talking among themselves as to how their new patient could have burned himself to this extent. They were mystified. 2 liability attorneys in Atlanta, Georgia heard about the case and thought they had a $3 million lawsuit on their hands because, in their view, something had malfunctioned in the motorhome. Yeah. An electrical failure, plumbing issue, something that would cause Jack Angel's burns. They took the case hoping for a 33% settlement, $1 million case for them. Big deal. We sat down with those 2 attorneys in their office in Atlanta, Georgia, as we sat down with Jack Angel in his home. Bottom line is this. The motorhome was torn down to the wheelbase looking for an external ignition source. Could find none. They considered lightning, external source. No evidence of lightning during the time that Jack was in the motorhome. Bottom line is this. To the exclusion of any reasonable, plausible, common sense, external ignition source, none could be found. Mm-hmm. Combine that with the medical documentation we have from Mr. Angel's treatment. He was burned. Got to get this quote correct. Burns are internal in origin, according to the physicians who treated Jack's injuries.
Interesting.
We know no way to interpret that three-word phrase other than that he burned from the inside out.
Mm-hmm.
Besides the severe third and fourth degree burn injuries to his forearm, he had other burn injuries on his right chest, in his spinal column, on the nape of his neck, in his groin area.
Huh.
This was a fire that burned. This was an energy that produced burn injuries to the body of Jack Angel from the inside out. That to us meets, based on physical, photographic, and medical documentation, the reality of spontaneous human combustion for a person who survived it and lived to tell the incredible tale. We will never forget sitting down with Jack Angel, getting his story, and having him wave the stump of his right arm because the forearm, he decided to have it amputated rather than go through months of possibly not successful reconstructive surgery.
Yeah.
Rubbing that stump of his right arm in front of us and saying, Larry, I don't know what else the hell happened to me other than it was spontaneous human combustion. And we believe him. It's a credible story that we've well documented. It's been explained away, allegedly explained away as something else, but we submit that our documentation, a full chapter in the Blaze, is devoted to the Jack Angel case. We met with 5 motorhome technicians who serviced these motorhomes, including the Avco home in which Jack slept. I said, is it possible? Does your expertise as a repair person, as a salesman for these motorhomes, can you provide us any way by which Jack Angel could have experienced this kind of burn injury because of a plumbing failure or an electrical short? And they said, no, absolutely not.
Strange. Now, did he...
Very strange.
So he's in the motorhome. Did he... was there any, like, what were the circumstances, I suppose, of leading up to this? Did he do anything different? I'm sure he's tried to figure it out himself in a way. Like, what could have, was it, it's such cliche. Was it something I ate? Was it, did he, or maybe it was like the time of year or the location of where he was or something, or maybe there was turmoil in his life at the time. If we're kind of going with this possible gastrointestinal, for lack of a better term, explanation. Maybe this was psychosomatic and it spawned. Like, does he have any idea? Was there anything out of ordinary in his life leading up to this that might explain how this could have happened, or at least give a clue?
Sure. He certainly pondered that for the rest of, to our knowledge, for the rest of his life, certainly up to the time that we had the opportunity to sit down and chat with him about this episode. He certainly tried to figure it out. He could come up with nothing. We certainly pursued that with him. We put questions to him looking for any kind of psychological issue, emotional issue, dietary issue that might have changed just before this happened to him in November of 1974. Neither of us came up with anything. He was happily married. He was married to a much younger woman, apparently quite attractive. He was quite a success as a traveling salesman. He was living the good life, they would say, back in 1974, with no explanation whatsoever, no preliminary preceding episodes, psychological, emotional, physiological, that would have alerted him that this was about to happen to his body.
Yeah. Interesting. Now, you say you've talked to other survivors since then. Are there any particular ones that stand out in your mind that are particularly compelling?
We've done a number of television shows with Peter and Barbara Jones. Their story is a little different than Jack Angel's, but nonetheless fits the concept of SHC. Story for Peter Jones goes like this. He was sitting on the edge of his bed one morning in October of 1980 in California, getting ready to go to work, getting himself suited up, when, as he sat on the edge of his bed, his wife Barbara was next to him, and suddenly they both realized he was becoming engulfed in a cloud of whitish gray smoke.
Oh, wow.
Barbara sat up quickly and started patting her husband on his thighs, on his back, anywhere she could think to put out the fire, get rid of the smoke. The smoking did spontaneously cease, as it apparently had spontaneously erupted. They looked at each other and said, "What the hell was that?"
Yeah.
They had no answers. They looked under the bed. They looked for an external ignition source. Not smoking at the time. Peter at that time was suffering gout. Whether that has a connection to this eruption of smoke from his body, we do not know. Peter Jones is a gentleman who remains remarkably calm under fire, to use a pun. Finished getting dressed and went to work. On his way home that afternoon, he was stopped in his car at a railroad grade crossing waiting for the train to go by so he could proceed home. While he was at the grade crossing for the second time in that day in October 1980 for Mr. Jones, his body again began to exude the same color smoke that he experienced that morning. This time it was coming down from his upper arm, across the lower forearm, and out through the cuffs of his clothing.
Oh, boy.
As I said, Peter Jones tended to be remarkably calm even under fire. He rolled down the window, vented the smoke. When the train went by, the grade crossing went up, he went home, but never told his wife that this happened to him a second time in that remarkable day in his life. Not until they were watching the program That's Incredible on ABC in 1980 and saw us discussing the Jack Angel case, he turned to his wife, Barbara, and said, "Remember back in October of 1980 when you were sitting on the bed beside me and I went up and smoked?" She said, "How the hell could I forget?" He said, "Well, it happened to me a second time that day, but I didn't have the nerve to tell you about it." We've spoken to both of them repeatedly over the years. We have no reason to doubt their story. We find it completely credible. As bizarre and, we choose the correct word, incredible, as it will sound to many people, we find their story completely credible because it fits within the body of the research that we've done about this phenomenon that history has called spontaneous human combustion.
Now, was he feeling pain, or was the smoke just he was just emanating? He was just distributing smoke, or however you say it.
If you would accept his story, as we do, his body simply, his flesh exuded smoke for reasons that he and his wife could not understand, for reasons that we, at this point, cannot understand ourselves. A couple years after that, we had the opportunity to meet a housewife in Ohio who had a very similar story. She was wrapping up breakfast dishes one Sunday morning in her kitchen, when she noticed or felt a light heat sensation rising up her back and ending up at her left shoulder. When she turned to see what might be causing that, thinking maybe she had contacted, a hot burner on the stove, she noticed smoke coming from the back of her left shoulder. She let out a scream. Her husband was nearby. He rushed in, started ripping off her garments, thinking once again that she had somehow caught her clothing afire in the kitchen. With each layer of garment removed, they finally came down with no source for the smoke. They finally came down to her bare flesh, and she had a first-degree burn on the rear of her upper left shoulder. By the time she went to meet with her doctor for a diagnosis and a possible explanation, he certainly had none to give her. But again, the similarities to her case to Jack Angel's case are almost identical. It's not the only case we have. Yes, there's several more cases like this. We've spoken now to about 24 survivors of partial SHC.
Wow. Are they more contemporaneous, would you say, than more recent in more recent years? I wonder if there's a certain thing where it's like people were more likely to fall victim back in the day, whereas now, I don't know. I don't know. It's a fast-paced world. Maybe people just notice it quicker, where they're like, "Okay, what's going on?" Or I don't know. It's something. I just wonder if if it was something that people are surviving now, where before they weren't, or something. I don't know.
There's so many ways we can go with that question. Let's see if we can get a couple of them off the top of our head. First, investigating and documenting this subject is incredibly difficult. First responders tend not to want to talk about it, or if they will, they misrepresent the evidence, as so many of our debunkers have done. So finding the key aspects to alert us to a case of possible SHC versus a normal conventional fire fatality is a challenge in and of itself. Second, about the survivors themselves. Most of the survivor cases that we have are fairly recent, the last couple of decades. That's not to say that it's a uniquely modern phenomenon. We would strongly suspect that there have been survival cases of partial SHC for hundreds, if not thousands of years, but they don't get reported in the medical literature. It's like a pilot seeing a UFO. Do I really want to talk about it? Nah, I want to keep things cool here. Another point to your observation in terms of timing. We had found in our research what appeared to be a cyclical nature to the phenomenon itself. For a long time, about every 33 years, there was a spike in the number of classic fatal SHC cases.
Yeah.
The last one, well, the cycle we had in 1871, 1905, 1938. We should have seen a spike in cases around 2004, and we did not. So either the cyclical nature is based on insufficient data, or our conclusion from the earlier cases is wrong. It would be that. Or there are cases that happened in that period that we haven't heard about because they were so fully covered up or misrepresented.
That's entirely possible. Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking in a way, because with a lot of this stuff, even like UFO cases, it's like we know a lot about the cases like up to the turn of the century, but it's like there's really no, it's just not the same anymore, if that makes any sense. It's like you just don't ever hear about a crazy UFO sighting in one particular place, and like there's no like seminal cases since the turn of the century. A couple maybe, right? But not like that. And certainly, yeah, it seemed like everything kind of slowed down a lot around the turn of the century. Maybe you will find, as time goes on, people will harken back and be like, yeah, well, it happened around 2004. I'm sure people come to you with stories, not from like recently, but they're like, oh, yeah, like 15 years ago, I just heard you on this podcast, and I'm reaching out to you because I had this experience.
That's one of the joys of doing programs like this with you, who take the subject seriously. It's, as we said, it's really difficult to find these cases. We've got one that we've been trying to track down. When we were in California in February of 2025, we spent several days, and before going out there, we did the online archival paperwork to try to get information on this case. So far, we failed. This is a case that happened in Long Beach, California, about 1999, 2000. We're going to read real quickly because maybe one of your listeners, this will trigger a bell and get in touch with us. The victim was an elderly, bedridden woman. The fire lasted less than 4 minutes and was centered around her knees and thighs. He estimates that over 5 million BTUs per minute had to be released from what he calls the woman's cremating lower body. Fire was incredibly localized. He says, this is a fire investigator who gave us this information. He says there was not enough oxygen in that room to release that much heat, no matter what the fuel, and he puts fuel in air quotes, what the fuel could be. We found no fuel source. In other words, this was not an arson murder. This was not a fire that was fed by an accelerant like gasoline.
Yeah.
He says there is no explanation under normal scientific means. I could not replicate the fire using any non-nuclear means. It is still a mystery. We've been unable to track that case down, but it had to, if there's anybody alive who was serving in Long Beach, California area in 1990-ish, or know somebody who was, please get in contact with us. We want desperately to nail this case down. As we said earlier, it's difficult to identify these cases in the first place. In the case of Dr. Bentley, this is the case that really set us on a new career path. His death in 1966 in northern Pennsylvania left behind half of a leg, a few pounds of powder that was found in the basement floor of his home, a pile of powder 5 inches in height, 14 inches in diameter, and no other significant fire damage. In fact, Don Gosnell, the meter reader and volunteer firefighter in Countersport who discovered this remarkable fire scene, when he saw that leg on the bathroom floor of Dr. Bentley, he first thought that this was a leg of a mannequin and wondered why the 92-year-old physician was doing with a mannequin leg in his bathroom.
Yikes, yeah.
Until we bent down and got a closer look and said, oh, my God, this is not a mannequin leg. This is a human leg. And then he realized that the pile of ash that was in the basement that he had just recently kicked with his work boot when he was down in the basement to read the gas meter was what was left of Dr. Bentley.
Yeah.
It's just astounding. We have been at that fire scene. We could touch the ceiling with our outstretched hand. We stand 6 feet tall. The ceiling was not much higher than that. Not a scorch mark on that ceiling. Dr. Bentley was invalid. He used an aluminum walker to move around the apartment. And this is the fire scene. We got it. That's the leg. That's the hole through which his body burned. He used that aluminum walker to locomote through his apartment. Aluminum will melt at 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit. Aluminum walker is intact, as are two tips on the leg, rubber tips. Bathtub is blackened above the hole through which his body burned, but the paint on that bathtub, it was paint, did not blister.
Yeah.
We were able to chip samples off. As you said, the ceiling right above this hole, not a scorch mark on it. Also odd in that fire scene was the presence of a sweet, redolent aroma, not the noxious burned flesh smell that you normally find at a fatal fire scene. In fact, the neighbor who lived across the street from Dr. Bentley, we managed to interview last year, she told us that about the time we think this episode happened, about 6:30 in the morning of December 5, 1966, she and her mother were mystified that somebody nearby was, she thought, barbecuing steak outdoors. Now, this is in the winter. Countersport's really cold in the winter. You're not barbecuing on December 5 out of the winter. So she thought this was a strange smell. Don Gosnell told us it was a sweet odor that he couldn't specifically identify, but it was very curious to him. How difficult is it to find cases like this? We got the death certificate for Dr. Bentley. Now, in Pennsylvania, as in any other state, a death certificate is a legal document. It's supposed to be an accurate description with information about how a person died.
Yeah.
The death certificate of Dr. Bentley, it says that he died by asphyxiation with 90% burned to the body over a period of half an hour, signed by the coroner. Here's the problems. And there's a shitload of problems with that.
Yeah. I was going to say that sounds pretty shady.
First, as you know, Tim, and hopefully your listeners also know, how do you determine asphyxiation? You need mouth, trachea, esophagus, and lungs, none of which existed at the Bentley fire scene. So you can't determine medically asphyxiation as cause of death. Mm-hmm. As for 90% burning to the body, as the deputy coroner John Deck told us, I'd say 99%. Half of a leg, a head that was so badly burned that first responders didn't identify it as a head, and a patella, part of a kneecap. Everything else was powder. Skeleton was bone dry powder in the basement below. And as far as the half hour, 30-minute time frame, that's a wild ass guess. There's no way that could have been determined by any means.
I don't understand how that kind of intense amount of heat to manage to reduce this dude into a pile of dust could work so fast and not leave any not take the whole house down. It was that hot. How, it's very baffling. It's baffling.
The owner of the house was in construction, and he told us one of the things that baffled him about this particular fire was that this house was about 100 years old, so the timbers were dry. He said for a body to burn this completely, it should have taken down the entire structure. House fires rarely get above 1,700 degrees Fahrenheit. At that temperature, it's pretty much a structure fire. Bodies that are burned in normal structure fires can be taken out, bagged, and taken to the morgue for autopsy. If it's an arson murder, the examiner is going to find evidence of gunshot wound, stab wound, because the body is still pretty much intact. We have a forensics expert who has written that even in the most badly burned body, she can find evidence of foul play. We would challenge her to find any evidence of foul play in the ashes that Dr. Bentley left behind. And we can make that statement for many other cases as well that are similar to his.
Now, this is a real throwback in a sense. I was talking on social media about spontaneous human combustion back in 2020, so 5 years ago. Actually, this is it's long overdue that we got you back on the show, Larry, because I do have an absolute fascination with this. I'm glad we're really rekindling our conversation about this phenomenon. But John Tenney, who's a friend, he said this. I want to get your thoughts on this. He said, I had a conversation about SponCom with a friend who's a fire chief for a Metro Detroit fire company. And during the conversation, he mentioned that over the years and due to building materials, it might be harder to collect cases due to the fact that in the 70s, it took between 17 and 25 minutes for an average structure to engulf in flames. And now the average is about 6 minutes. Mm-hmm. And it says between 60s and 70s, the longest burn time for structures was around 20 to 30 minutes due to the use of brick and hardwood. So he's essentially saying sort of like the change in building materials has caused contemporaneous buildings to burn down faster than back in the day. Whereas, so if someone spontaneously combusted and then it spread and took the whole thing down, you would never really know. But I guess, I don't know, does that count as a spontaneous, because with spontaneous human combustion, well, I suppose it could be just another form of it where it's like, look, it could be like a scale. First, you're feeling the blisters and shit. And if that doesn't stop, then you spontaneously combust. And then if nobody, if it doesn't get caught up, then somehow you can take out other stuff around you. I don't know. But I laid a lot out there on you. But I mean, what do you think of this building materials thing being a speed bump to finding new cases?
What you said about building materials is certainly true based on our knowledge of construction materials. In fact, just today we were looking at one of our reports in our case files where that very thing has been discussed. It dealt with people who bored through holes, and it said that because of the newer construction equipment, a lot of petrochemicals, a lot of glues and so on that is used in wood fiber. We're not dealing anymore with oak beams, which was the case in Dr. Bentley's fire scene, but materials that are much more combustible, have lower ignition points, much more readily inflammable. So your comment about structure fires being consumed more rapidly these days, we certainly would concur with that based on what we know about fire science and fire materials. True. How that applies to spontaneous human combustion and sudden human cremation, SHC seems to be relegated almost entirely to the physical, corporeal body itself.
Right. That's why I was
the case that you mentioned from Zimbabwe may twist that a bit, but as we said earlier, this whole phenomenon of pyrophenomena, weird fires, is so diverse, so confusing, so varied in the specific details of each case. It makes the research difficult, both as a researcher, as a scientist, and as a scientist trying to figure out how these cases can be best explained. Yeah. If there was one explanation if all the cases, as we said, if they all looked alike, it would be fairly easy to posit and narrow down the ideas as to how these fires could occur. But when you go from somebody whose body simply smokes to the other extreme, which would be Dr. Bentley or Mary Weiser, whose 180-pound body is reduced to literally a few pounds of ash and rubble, where nothing else of any significance is damaged by flame or heat. Our brain can't bundle those extremes into one causative mechanism. Right.
If it was that easy,
if somebody can do it for us, have at us. We welcome the insight. What we will say with authority is that these classic cases are not explained by what most experts, forensic anthropologists and so on, forensic biologists in the fire service profession would tell us can be explained as and by the wick effect. These are not fires that are explained by a dropped cigarette or an external ignition source slowly emulating the body. In our early research, we tried to demonstrate that theory could explain these fire scenes. And if so, we're perfectly happy with that. we'd find something else curious and mysterious to investigate.
Yeah.
But in our experiments, we've watched people on television use the Wick effect to explain away as in air quotes, spontaneous human combustion by taking a sliver of fat, wrapping it in cheesecloth, holding it over a lit Bunsen burner, and surprise, surprise, the fat chars. But you can't go from that demonstration to extrapolating that and applying it to a 180 or 200-pound human being who's 75% water to begin with.
Right.
We had another naysayer, John DeHaan, a renowned expert in fire science, take a pig, which is a reasonable stand-in, but douse it with gasoline in order to prove the Wick effect. And he knew better. The BBC producer who filmed that segment knew better because he had previously filmed us. And we said, if John DeHaan can prove the Wick effect without an accelerant, kudos to him. We'll be impressed and we'll accept the results. Dousing the pig with an accelerant when there's no accelerant involved in any of the cases that history has defined as SHC is, let's be kind, it's unscientific.
Yeah.
We also have John DeHaan in the line. We'll tell this to you. There's a program that the two of us did for the Learning Channel in 1995, if memory serves. We're going to change that, I think, to 2003. Anyway, it was called Spontaneous Combustion. And in that experiment by Mr. DeHaan, instead of using a pig, he took a fistful of candles, specifically 12 wax candles, wrapped it in cotton, laid it on a futon, and lit it. To prove the Wick effect can explain Dr. Bentley and Mary Reeser and George Mott, that retired firefighter in upstate New York who burned himself through his bed into a pile of powder below. The program for TLC has John lighting the candles and coming back into the burn chamber. The fire is out, and he stands there saying, look, localized combustion. This is just what Larry calls spontaneous human combustion, but clearly I've proven that it's not spontaneous. That's what the viewing public saw.
Yeah.
But that is not what happened in the experiment. And we have the proof in hand that what John DeHaan did and what TLC showed was fraudulent, to be polite and kind. There's another word. What actually happened at the burn chamber was that the fire raged into a near flashover situation. Fire suppression equipment had to be brought in to quell the raging inferno. That's why he ended up with a sort of localized fire.
Yeah.
None of that has ever happened in any of the cases that history has called and that we discuss in our book Ablaze as being classic SHC.
Yeah.
These fires begin by themselves and put themselves out.
See, I'm trying to wrap my head around it. Yeah. There's like a magician trick, like flash paper that when they lighted it, like when they in old school wrestling, when they throw a fireball at the other guy, that's what they use. Right. And that to me is kind of what I imagine in a sense is happening here, where it's like there's some kind of internal thing. The fire starts and it goes really quickly, burning out to the out of the body. Now, is there any, because there's all kinds of weird medical phenomena, right? Is there anything in the medical history books or textbooks or whatever, medical studies, maybe they dance around it and they don't want it to touch on spontaneous human combustion, but is there any sort of physiological phenomenon where you go to the doctor and they're like, oh, you have this thing, and it's like, oh, I have a burning set like this. Have there ever been documented cases where it's like, oh, I think they actually maybe were studying the beginnings of spontaneous human combustion and they called it this thing because they figured out, oh, maybe it's caused by something, or they couldn't figure it out, but they were like, okay, we don't know what it is. Do you get what I'm saying?
Absolutely get what you're saying. We've got to start the response by mentioning menopause.
Okay.
We know women.
Hot
and
flashes.
This is,
Okay.
Hot flashes. And this has been also said about ourselves personally. Some people get extremely hot in sleep stage. And menopausal women, they can be fully awake when they get these incredibly hot, unbearable temperatures within their bodies. Can that extend to evolving into a classic SHC? Possibly. We can't say medically whether it's happened, but we're not willing to exclude that extrapolation. As to your question about are there conditions or terminology within mainstream medical science that will recognize it as spontaneous human combustion, but simply call it something different? Yes. There's a a phenomenon called SJS, Stevens-Johnson syndrome, in which the body will burn through what is presently believed to be a chemical process.
Interesting.
By our definition, Stevens-Johnson syndrome could be renamed spontaneous human combustion. When we've presented our research to fire science classes at the college level, we sometimes will bring up SCGS because obviously the firefighters are put back by the spontaneous human combustion concept, Right. But they look at the photographs, they hear the evidence, they get the stories, and they're going, wow, this is really weird, but I'm still not quite kind of convinced. But when we hit them with Stevens-Johnson syndrome, because this is medically accepted, they go, okay. Could that then be extrapolated? Could that unfold to another degree of severity? And rather than the flesh burning or blistering, it continues to evolve over a very short period of time, as you suggest. In our view, many of these cases, if not all of them, are very short duration fire process or energy processes. The naysayers who invoke the Wick effect say, well, Larry, you don't understand. These fires are, as John DeHaan has told us, these are low temperature, long duration, smoldering fires over many, many, many hours to burn a body this completely. Well, okay, again, be honest and show us the evidence for case after case where this has truly happened. One of the cases that we haven't discussed yet, we devote a full chapter in the Blaze to the case of Helen Conway. This is a 49-year-old businesswoman, a widow, who lived outside of Philadelphia in 1964, if memory serves.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We learned about this. Yep. We learned about this case when we were at taking an advanced arson fire science course at the Pennsylvania Fire Academy. We may have been the first non-firefighter to be given access to the advanced training because we were learning things that they don't want the general public to know about.
Okay.
At the end of that case, the instructor, Buzz Treadbold, said, I got this really interesting set of photographs that some people say is spontaneous human combustion. She said there were extremities of the lady were left in a chair, not much else, but pretty much besides the lower extremity, she was burned away. And we're thinking this is the Mary Reeser case from 1951 until the photograph got in our hand and we said, oh my God, this isn't Reeser. This is a fire scene. This is a new case to us.
Yeah.
Two lower legs of the victim were propped up in front of her chair. And looking beyond the legs, her thighs were incinerated. She used a brass bell. We could see in the photograph. She used a brass bell. The brass bell was laying on her right thigh, intact. Brass had not melted. The wood handle, which would burn about 500 degrees, is its ignition point and ignition temperature. It was intact. Her breastbone was exposed but severely charred. Her left forearm was charred, burned to the bone, but from the ulna was dangling a charm bracelet intact. It appeared that the body had been forced back into the chair, so as you looked up her body over her chest, you could see the inverted V of her jaw. Her jaw had been pushed back against the wall.
Jesus.
We rushed up to Buzz Treadbold after the rest of the class had left and introduced ourselves and said, this is what we do. This is who we are. Who is this victim? Where did this happen? When did this happen? New case. Yes. We're excited. He says, I don't know. All I know about this fire is it happened somewhere in southeastern Pennsylvania. Well, if you know Pennsylvania geography, that's Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Millions of people live in southeastern Pennsylvania. How are we going to find this case? It took us 9 months, but we nailed it. We sat down with the fire photographer who later became fire marshal for Upper Darby Township. We sat down with the fire chief and the assistant fire marshal. Here's the key for this case: decide the incredible destruction to Mrs. Conway in a very localized fire scene that had no odor of burned flesh, no odor at all at the fire scene. As to the time frame, every one of these fire experts told us from the time that Mrs. Conway was known to be alive until the fire department arrived to a fire scene that did not require extinguishment to any degree. The elapsed time initially was said to be no more than 21 minutes. But in sitting down with the fire photographer and working back with him the time that it took him to get to the fire scene, to leave the fire scene, her instructions to the fire chief, to get his camera, return to the fire scene, and take 12 amazing black and white photographs, we narrowed that time frame down to no more than 6 minutes. 360 seconds was all the time that Mrs. Conway had to incinerate herself to this extent. Nobody, not even the most ardent. We have a cat feeding dish that's going on in the background.
It's all good.
Not even the most ardent debunker of SHC can explain that time frame to us.
Yeah.
So they just ignore it and say the time frame has to be wrong. But we're the one who sat down with the 3 senior fire officials at that fire scene. We have no reason to doubt their collective credibility. We are sticking by that 6-minute duration. Now, go figure it out.
Yeah.
Bunkers.
That's another wild case. Now, I was surprised to see that we talked in 2011, and I was looking up some of your recent Coast to Coast appearances to see what you've been talking about. And one of them was a 2013 case. This happened after you and I had talked, amazingly. Danny Van Zant. Tell me about this one, because this is completely new to me.
Happy to do that. This is the most recent case in which we put our reputation as an investigator and a proponent of sudden human cremation on the line, because we went there. We did everything we could to collect as much evidence, as much information, as much background about the victim as we could. We had high hopes in this case. We got tipped off to the event, to Danny's death, by the Sequoia County sheriff in Oklahoma. Talked to him by telephone. He said, "I know of your research, Larry. We're mystified by this. You're welcome to come down. We'll do everything we can to help you, because we need help in studying this case." We had ready to make plane reservations to fly out to Oklahoma from Pennsylvania, and a very nasty blizzard hit eastern Oklahoma. Sheriff Lockhart said, "Don't come yet, because even if you can get here, you're not going to be able to do anything." So we waited a couple weeks until the blizzard remnants had thawed out, flew down. So we're there about, if memory serves, I think about 3 weeks after the fire happened. Met with Sheriff's Department, who in the meantime he had said publicly, this could be a case of SHC. We just don't know, but it certainly fits the concept of SponCom.
Wow.
By doing so, he took a lot of grief online. The internet trolls hammered the hell out of him. He's a Oklahoma rube. He's an idiot. He doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. The problem for those trolls is what they didn't know about Sheriff Lockhart. Before he became an elected sheriff in Sequoia County, he had worked 40 years as an arson investigator. Huh. He knew what to expect, what to find at a fatal fire scene until the Van Zandt case, because this belied everything that he expected to encounter at a fatal fire. Van Zandt left behind the following: a head, upper shoulders, a foot next to the hole through which the rest of his body burned into the crawl space below his kitchen, a heart, another foot in the crawl space below, some bones, some coins on the floor that had burned or fallen out of his burned coveralls. As memory serves, there's no odor of burned flesh at the fire scene. No external ignition source was identified by the investigators. As the fire chief, Mr. Russell, told us, This is a direct quote. This fire began and ended at the body.
Yeah.
He strove valiantly to look for an external ignition source. There was stove malfunction next to Danny Vizant. He ruled that out. They could find no electrical shorts, no lightning, all that kind of normal stuff. Mm-hmm. This was a very localized fire that happened in Van Zant's kitchen. It appears to us from the photographs that we have in our possession that the refrigerator door just above the hole through which his body immolated was ajar, and there's some carbonization discoloring on the refrigerator door. We think he was reaching for something in the refrigerator when something quite sudden, quite spontaneous, and quite thoroughly burned him to the extent that we just described.
Huh. Interesting.
One of our detractors, Mark Binnall, a forensic anthropologist, has said that spontaneous human combustion cannot occur because there is no case in which internal organs are more severely burned than our external body parts. Well, for Mr. Van Zant, as with Mrs. Reeser, as with Dr. Bentley, as with George Mott, in the Van Zant case, he left behind a heart, but no other internal organs, but leave behind lower leg, foot, upper shoulders, and head. So Mark Benecki's reasoning to dismiss SHC is belied by the evidence of the Van Zant case, among several other cases. We desperately wanted to meet with the next of kin. As you can imagine, this is a very delicate, sensitive, difficult endeavor to attempt. We're dealing with a fire fatality. We're dealing with psychological and emotional issues. And we're dealing with something that is admittedly very, very strange, not a typical fire death. We did manage, after several attempts, to get Mr. Van Zant's father to agree to a meeting with us. As we were driving to meet with him, we got a phone call that said, "I've changed my mind. I don't want to see you." We were disappointed, but not and disheartened, but not dismayed. We continued our journey. We did meet with him, hoping our presence would convince him to change his mind, that we could find out, was there something in Mr. Van Zant's medical history, something about his psychological profile? Was there something emotionally that would have maybe contributed to this very unusual method of physical transition? He would not agree to talk with us, so we lost that opportunity. But once again, the evidence from the firefighters at the scene, the photographic evidence that was given to us, is classic, either spontaneous human combustion or corollary phenomenon that is not talked about much these days. That was discussed back in the 1800s, a corollary phenomenon called preternatural combustibility. This produces the same end result as does SHC, except that there is a known external ignition source. Now, Mr. Van Zant was a smoker, but according to the local fire experts, as well as Sheriff Lockhart, there was not enough fuel loading there. That even if Van Zant had dropped a cigarette on himself, carelessly perhaps, there was not enough fuel loading in his clothing to incinerate a body to the extent that it was in the known time duration frame. There may be a phenomenon that has been called preternatural combustibility, in which certain members of the human species are walking tinderboxes, infernos waiting to happen, that if they do come in contact with a dropped cigarette or lit match or a stove burner that's on, their body will then become instantly a human fireball. But that's just trading one physiological anomaly for another one.
Well, I was thinking
the end result is the same.
I was thinking when you said that, he was reaching for the handle of the refrigerator, you say, and maybe some kind of static electrical spark. That was my first thought. Like, he reached it, there was a spark, and then that set him off somehow.
We would not dismiss that as a consideration. Again, we just don't know enough about the physiological, the biological properties of these victims to go any farther than to say it's a possibility, and let it at that for now. Right. If we could get the cooperation of more firefighters at these remarkable fire scenes, if we could elicit the cooperation of the next of kin, maybe we could, or someone else could find a key bit of information that would nail down how best to explain these remarkable human baffling burnings.
Yeah, well, I was really taken aback when you recounted that story because this fire chief sounded, he reached out to you. He went, saying it in the media is pretty crazy. As soon as you said that, and then I was like, uh-oh, here we go. And then you confirmed my worst fears. That he got a bunch of ridicule. But even that he reached out to you is remarkable. Do you have, you've been doing this for 50 years. You must have kind of like a network of people in the fire world who certainly, if something comes up, they'll reach out to you, right? I'm sure just because there's a lot of detractors doesn't mean there aren't a lot of believers, and you've made a lot of friends over the last 50 years in the fire community. I imagine you kind of have sort of maybe like a little underground network of people who would let you know if something happens.
We certainly hope so. When we go traveling, we were endeavor to stop at the local firehouse station, introduce ourselves, and say, "Are you interested in the research that we've done? Have you ever had a encounter? Have you ever responded to a fire scene like the ones that we would like to show you pictures of? Or in your educational work, have you been to a fire conference, a seminar where you've heard someone else talk about these remarkably rare but dramatic localized fires?" And we let our business card. We're still waiting for the call. We are prepared to rush out. We've got lots of frequent flyer mileage stacked up. We will invest that to fly anywhere that we can if we find a credible lead on one of these remarkably bizarre, yet certainly to us, immensely fascinating fires. This is a puzzle that someone is going to figure out someday. If it's not us, hopefully our research will be sufficient to allow someone in the future to figure out this combustible conundrum.
Well, I got to say, Larry, when I talked to you in 2011, I didn't realize you had already been in it for so long, and now it's been 14 years later. Man, if there's a Paranormal Hall of Fame someday, you're like a first ballot guy. I'm amazed at the work that you've done. Your career is tremendous. It really is. It's outstanding. You're the guy. You're the one who's made spontaneous, who's kept this thing alive and found other cases. I'm absolutely in awe of your contribution to the paranormal world, man. You're a hero already tonight to me. Kind of absorbing all this. I'm like, I can't believe this guy's been doing this for 50 years, carrying on spontaneous human combustion when really nobody else really is. This isn't like a big community of researchers. It's you. It's you trying to get to the bottom of this mystery.
Well, bless your heart for that. That's very, very kind. One of our critics has called us a mystery monger because we're too stupid to embrace the Wick effect. Just to show you, this is our file in the Reeser case from 1951.
Wow.
If we're mystery mongering, we're not going to be doing this kind of shit, Yeah. These are photographs. These are newspaper clippings. These are interviews. We don't need to mystery monger about this phenomenon. The mystery is in the phenomenon itself. Yeah. It's crying out for investigation. It's crying out for study. It's begging for an explanation. These fires, rare that they are, and they are very infrequent, which makes the research and the documentation all that more challenging. But they will happen in the future. Mr. Van Zandt in 2013 was not the last person who's going to fit the conceptual definition of preternatural or spontaneous human combustion. There will be more cases, and there will be perhaps covered up. They perhaps will be misrepresented, as so many have been done, has happened so often in the past. But maybe one of them is going to occur before a bank of television cameras or somebody with a smartphone readily at hand, and we'll finally have real-time visual video documentation that this phenomenon isn't mystery mongering, isn't superstition, isn't a myth. It is a real physiological, biological, and medical mystery.
Yeah, well, you talk about the next of kin, and I think that would be important in a sense too, because what would be a breakthrough case in a sense, I think it would be if someone fell victim to spontaneous human combustion or sudden human creation, and their family members were familiar with this phenomenon and were like, okay, this is and wouldn't let it go. You know what I mean? I think that would be very beneficial, I suppose, just to getting attention towards the mystery, because then you would have people, advocates for getting to the bottom of it. But it seems like a lot of these folks just kind of die alone, or their families are like, look, we don't want to be the champions for spontaneous human combustion. I don't blame them. But I think that would be sort of a sea change moment where, like, you know, like if I had a family member that suddenly burst into flames, I'd be like, that's spontaneous human combustion. I'm calling Larry Arnold. We're going to get to the bottom of this. You know, I'm not going to let the fire department just give me the runaround, you know. But I think a lot of people maybe are just kind of like, yeah, okay, they said it was whatever. So we're not going to, you know, who are we to look into it more?
Right. It takes a family with an open mind who is curious about the mysteries that we all live within. To contact us should a case happen within their family. It is frightful, it is fearsome, but it is also fascinating, and there is a mystery here to be solved. And if a family who experiences this to a relative would be open enough and curious enough and forthright enough to contact us, we might be able to understand how it happened to their relative and extrapolate to find ways to prevent this from happening to people in the future. You raised a point that has been evoked against the research and against the subject by many debunkers, and that is, it happens to people who are alone. So it's never been witnessed. You know, no one saw the drop cigarette. No one saw the arson murderer carefully sneak in and douse the person with gasoline and escape undetected. In our book Ablaze, we have a chapter devoted to witnessed cases. These cases, in some instances, have been observed by bystanders, but most often is reported as a bright electric blue colored light or energy that engulfs the victim. Which again suggests to us that this is not an oxidizing type of combustion, because a blue oxidizing flame is very hot. But at this point, we don't know any means by which an oxidizing fire can be spontaneously kindled in a human body. But if we're looking at biochemistry or bioelectricity, that are prana, ki, those kinds of, you know, arcane esoteric energies that all living persons, we believe, have functioning in their bodies.
Yeah.
Then we can look for other explanations and really broaden the concept, the understanding of this phenomenon, way beyond what normal fire science is willing to entertain as possibilities. Yeah. But with this subject, we need to go beyond. We need to expand widely the breadth, the considerations, to try to come to terms with the evidence that these individuals have left for all of us to ponder and question.
Okay. I got a few more questions for you. I'm going to get you a little over the 90 minutes mark. I hope you don't mind. So now one thing I was wondering is, I covered a story, and it was in England in 2017. It was like a man who burst into flames on a park bench. I don't know if you heard about this case. I could tell you that one too after we get off the air. But what struck me there was the guy was sitting on a park bench. Are these cases, these SpawnCom cases, are they predominantly indoors? Do they primarily happen indoors, or are there instances where these happen? I mean, you said the guy was driving. Well, that he's a survivor, but you know, that might be an instance. But I mean, what's the numbers on that, would you say?
Off the top of our head, we've not crunched the data in that category per se, but just off the top of our head, most of the cases we think we can say with some certainty are indoors. We have cases of people sitting in chairs, lying on beds. Right. Possibly watching television. But we also have cases where people have been in automobiles, as with Peter Jones. We have Marge Comasson was said to be in a boat with her family in a lake in Norfolk, England, when it happened to her. We have a couple cases of people on dance hall floors. Some people are arguing that those are explained by flammable crinoline dresses. We're not so certain that is applicable in all those cases.
Okay. All right. That was a completely off the top of my head thing, so I don't even expect. They gave you something to think about a little bit there. Now,
yep.
Now, when we talked in 2011, things were pretty good internet-wise, right? But now things are fantastic, and you can really get a lot of information. Like I have been meaning to do it myself, sort of looking into. You can go to newspapers.com, and like looking at all the old newspapers. Have you used these resources to sort of try and find any older cases that maybe, if they happened like in Wichita in 1972 and it didn't get past the local paper, it would just have been forgotten? Like, have you utilized some of these resources to see if there's any hidden gems out there in the newspaper archives of America from the last, 100 years or whatever that's now available online?
We have done that, absolutely. We've not found any spontaneous human combustion cases that way yet. But we did find an very obscure case of poltergeist-type spontaneous combustion out of the Midwest through newspapers.com. Yes.
Yeah.
So that's a venue. We used to go to libraries and use microfilm or the actual physical newspapers, going page after page after page after page. As we said earlier, when we went down to beginning our research archivally, we would go down to the Library of the College of Physicians in Philadelphia, as well as the Library of Congress, the National medical libraries, institutes of health libraries, just pulling up cartload after cartload of medical textbooks and going through indexes and chapter headings, looking for something that might fit, why we were there.
Yeah.
And we found several cases that had been lost to history by doing that very, very method of old time research that actually is quite fun to do. It's more fun going through paper and microfilm than it is looking at a computer screen and scrolling with a mouse.
Yeah, I can see that. Now,
so those are much more laborious.
Yes, exactly. Well, I mean, it's difficult even though today, it's hard to search that kind of stuff out anyway on the internet. Like, I don't know if you know, I work for Coast to Coast and I write about everything paranormal. And I'm always, when I can, write about spontaneous human combustion. It's always so few and far between. But every day I'm like searching for mysterious fires. That's like how I got that one in Zimbabwe. But it is very difficult to even, because like a lot of places, they don't want to use spontaneous human combustion. So you got to kind of like outwit the stigma and figure out, okay, where was this mysterious fire and why is it mysterious? You know what I mean? So it's a real challenge. I totally see what you're saying about finding cases, because believe me, if I could find more, I would cover it all the time because people would love it.
We know exactly what you're saying. That applies specifically to the 2013 Van Zandt case. If Sheriff Lockhart had not alluded to spontaneous human combustion, we would never have heard about the case. At the same time, though, it presents the stigma that the next of kin doesn't want to deal with. So if you don't hear the terminology, you don't know to look for the case. But in using the terminology, then you set up barriers and mental blocks that some people don't want to go beyond. Yeah. So it's a catch-22 type of situation, which makes the research very difficult.
Yeah.
Certainly challenging, but it can also become very rewarding when we do break through the barriers and we find one of these remarkable cases to document.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, have you written up anything about this Danny Van Zandt case? Because this kind of segues into the other part where it's like, I was talking at the beginning of the show. I got the anniversary episode coming up, actually 20 years. This book, Ablaze, this came out 30 years ago. I mean, I don't know how you could even fucking improve on Ablaze, dude, because it's a seminal work. It is a seminal work. It belongs in every paranormalist's library. It's like, how could you even make a sequel? But it's been 30 years. Have you thought about, it doesn't have to be. Now, folks, if you haven't seen this, Ablaze is monstrous, too. It is amazing. But have you thought about maybe writing another book, writing a follow-up book, for the new generation, if you will? I mean, look, Larry, I just held up the book. You try getting some 20-year-old kid on TikTok to read this thing.
How about that? Yeah. Times have changed. Interests have shifted. To your point, yeah. Two things. We've just submitted a 13,000-word article to 40 Times. They knew it was coming. It will discuss 6 of our better cases, if we may, with the photographic documentation to make the case that this is a phenomenon that belongs on the shelf of Forteana. Mm-hmm. Beyond that, we are working on a series of books. Each book will focus on 1 or 2 cases and contain all the evidence, all the information, all the interviews that we have in that specific case. In Ablaze, we devote single chapters to specific cases.
Right.
But we still have a lot of information on each of those cases that has not yet appeared in print. So we're working on a series of books that would be devoted to, let's say, Dr. Bentley. A book devoted to Mary Reeser with all the documentation.
Excellent.
And let history deal with it as it chooses to.
Excellent. Now, one last one before I let you go. You, for some reason, it kind of piqued my interest. I thought you were going to go in one direction. You zigged in when I thought you were going to zag. Do you have any, and this may be in Ablaze, like I said, it's been a long time since I read the book, do you have any, or have you looked at any cases of spontaneous animal combustion?
We have, and it's in the book.
There you go.
Cats, dogs have been observed to erupt into that blue ball of light energy and become ashen. The naturalist Ivan Sanderson wrote about an encounter that he had on one of his hikes in a remote part of a woodland. Came upon a memory serves, I think it was a raccoon, but don't hold us to that. But half of the animal was incinerated, the other half was intact. And he could derive no external mechanism or energy or situation that could explain this severed half of an animal that had been partially burned away. So he thought this was a case of spontaneous animal combustion, SAC.
Crazy, yeah.
It is crazy.
Well, I got to tell you, Larry, for such a dark subject, this has been an absolute joy, this conversation.
Oh, bless your heart. Thank you.
I have had
Likewise, from our viewpoint.
I've had so much fun talking to you. It's really been everything you had to say made me start thinking of other questions, and I'm like, oh shit, this is just a fascinating, and again, for such a dark subject, such a fun conversation because it's such a curious mystery. It really takes hold of you and kind of. I can see how you have spent so long looking into this. And as I said, man, you're a legend. You're an all-time legend in this field. And the book is seminal. Ablaze, folks, you've heard him say it's all in the book. It's fantastic. Go out and get Ablaze if you can. It's still available on Amazon and all that. Hopefully it's not like all jacked up in price because it's so old, but it's out there. Get Ablaze. It's absolutely fantastic. What's the website we want to send people to, Larry?
Parascience, PARScience.com. Email is real simple. For this venue, it is shchappens@gmail. Have ideas, suggestions, leads? Please, if you have a lead, email us. But ideas, questions, you want to debate us? We're happy at it. Maybe we're completely wrong about this, but after 50 years, we stopped with the maybe, but the evidence that we have amassed, the interviews that we have conducted, will stand the test of time. We are not wrong in our conclusion that on rare occasions, the human body will self-ignite and burn itself to powder.
There you go, folks. Man, you're an all-time legend, Larry. I really do mean that. Thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been an absolute blast. And we're not going to do 14 years between the next time we chat. I'm going to probably be poking at you like in another year and a half to get you back on here to talk about this stuff. Thank you so much, sir. I have just really enjoyed this conversation so much.
Our pleasure as well. You honor us with your response to our research. You really do. We appreciate that very much. Blessings to you and to your listeners.